After 15 years with Westbridge Technologies, I knew the moment I was called into the glass conference room overlooking downtown Seattle that it wasn't good news. Across from me sat Marjorie Thompson, Director of Operations, and Denise Howard from HR. Both wore those practiced, sympathetic smiles that executives put on before delivering something they know will sting. "Laura, after 15 years with Westbridge, we're restructuring your position," Marjorie began, her voice smooth but lacking warmth. Denise pushed a manila folder across the table, the faint rustle of paper filling the silence. "The company is moving in a new direction," she said, careful and rehearsed. "Your work has been valuable, but the research division is being merged into product development." I didn't bother opening the folder. I already knew what it contained, the standard corporate farewell package. 2 weeks' pay for every year of service. 3 months of health coverage. Career counseling links I would never click. "I understand," I said evenly. These decisions are never easy. Both women visibly relaxed. They'd braced themselves for tears, outrage, maybe even a scene. After all, I was a 55-year-old woman in a field that idolized youth, innovation, and the illusion of fresh ideas. What they didn't know was that I'd been waiting for this moment. 3 weeks earlier, a misrouted internal email had landed in my inbox, a thread between senior management outlining strategic workforce optimization. In other words, who was getting cut. My name had been highlighted. From that moment, I'd quietly started preparing for today. "We'll need your laptop, ID badge, and company phone by Friday," Marjorie continued. "Your team will be notified later today." My team. 6 brilliant engineers I had personally hired and mentored over the years. Together, we'd developed the Parallel Stream engine, a distributed processing algorithm that powered Westbridge's flagship accounting software, FinEdge, a platform now used by nearly half of Fortune 500 companies. "Of course," I replied, rising from my seat. "Is there anything else?" They exchanged a brief, uncertain glance, caught off guard by my composure. "No, that's all for now," Marjorie said, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for handling this so professionally." I gave her a steady look. "Professionalism's what you hired me for," I said, and left the room. Walking down the hallway, I passed the boardroom where the executive team was in session. Through the glass, I could see Ethan Lawson, the company's CEO, gesturing confidently at a slide that read Q3 revenue targets. This was the same man who had taken credit for my algorithm at last year's tech summit in San Francisco, introducing me only as one of our talented engineers. When I reached my office, I closed the door, sat down, and took out my personal phone. My hands were steady. I sent one message. "It's happening." "Friday's my last day." The reply came seconds later. "Perfect. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize." I smiled slightly, glancing at my desk calendar. It was Wednesday. By Friday evening, I'd walk out of Westbridge Technologies for good. And by Monday morning, I'd be standing on the other side of the table. I had built the technology that made Westbridge a powerhouse. Now, they were about to learn what happens when you cut loose the person who built your empire. That evening, I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle's South Lake Union, the skyline gleaming against the water. I'd spent years in those buildings, watching other people make the kind of deals that determined the future of entire companies. Tonight, I was about to make one of my own. The restaurant was a quiet place tucked near the harbor. Modern, minimal, discreet. Inside, Daniel Price was already waiting at a corner table. He stood as I approached, extending his hand with the confidence of a man who never lost an argument. "Laura Bennett," he said with a smile. "I heard Westbridge finally made their move." "They did," I replied, setting my coat on the back of the chair. "Effective Friday." He raised an eyebrow. "You sound calm about it." "I've had time to plan," I said simply. Daniel Price wasn't just anyone. He was the founder and CEO of Nexora Systems, one of Westbridge's fastest-growing competitors. Our companies had circled each other for years, bidding for the same clients, recruiting from the same pool of talent. And for months, Daniel had been quietly reaching out through mutual contacts, suggesting that my work at Westbridge had untapped potential. As our drinks arrived, I slid a small encrypted USB drive across the table. "Everything's on there," I said. "The design framework, architecture blueprints, scalability model, all original." "All mine." Daniel turned the drive over in his hand, intrigued but cautious. "Yours? I thought Westbridge owned all IP developed under your department." "Not this," I said, meeting his eyes. What's running FinEdge today is based on my early version, Parallel Stream. But the enhanced version, the one I built on my own time, that's mine. I registered it 6 months ago under StreamCore Technologies LLC. He leaned back, absorbing the information. So you're saying you own the core of the next generation of distributed accounting systems? I'm saying, I replied, Westbridge has the past. I have the future. Daniel let out a slow whistle. And you're offering this to Nexora. I'm offering a partnership, I corrected. I'll head a new research division, autonomous, fully funded with creative control. You get exclusive licensing rights. I get to finish what I started, without someone else putting their name on it. He studied me for a moment. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. You've thought this through, he said. Every line of code, I answered. There was a long pause before he smiled. A small, approving one. You always had a reputation for being thorough, Laura. I like that. Let's finalize it. We talked for another hour, refining terms and timelines. By the time dessert arrived, the deal was essentially done. He'd have his legal team draw up the documents, but I knew Daniel well enough to recognize commitment when I saw it. As I drove home through the steady rain, my mind was clear. I had expected to feel angry, vindicated, maybe even nervous. Instead, I felt something quieter, a sense of precision. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was correction. The next day at Westbridge, I acted like nothing had changed. I smiled through meetings, sent handover notes, and answered the same polite condolences from people who were secretly relieved it wasn't them. But before I turned in my laptop on Friday, I made one final visit to the server room, that quiet, humming core of the building where Parallel Stream still pulsed through the network. I didn't delete anything. I didn't need to. I simply removed one small access token, a line of authentication code that linked the algorithm to its original seed file. Without it, the system would run fine. For now. But when they tried to upgrade or expand it, they'd find the locks I'd built in long ago. The same digital fingerprints that would trace back to StreamCore. By the time I officially left Westbridge Technologies, I already had a keycard for Nexora Systems. Daniel Price didn't waste time. Within a week, he'd secured a downtown office floor, signed off on my research budget, and announced the formation of a new division, StreamCore Labs, a Nexora partner initiative. My team consisted of 6 engineers, all handpicked. 2 were from my old Westbridge department, both of whom had quietly resigned after hearing I was moving into something new. The rest were fresh minds from Stanford and MIT, sharp enough to question everything and bold enough to try. During our first meeting, I stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, sketching the architecture for StreamCore V1, a faster, cleaner, smarter evolution of what Westbridge was still clinging to. Our goal is scalability, I said. Think real-time computation without dependency bottlenecks. Imagine thousands of concurrent financial operations running without delay. One of the younger engineers, Miles, looked skeptical. So, like FinEdge but faster? I smiled faintly. No, like FinEdge but flawless. The team laughed softly, half excitement, half disbelief, but within weeks they began to see it. Code that had taken Westbridge entire departments to debug was running in half the time. Our simulations hit 99.8% efficiency. Meanwhile, Westbridge's quarterly updates started faltering. It began with minor issues: lag reports from major clients, unexplained data queue backups, system restarts. Small things. But in finance, small things mean millions. From my new office window overlooking Elliott Bay, I watched the Westbridge building across town and thought of Ethan Lawson, the man who had once called my ideas a bit too complex for market readiness. He had no idea that the complexity he dismissed was now being refined into his company's biggest threat. At Nexora, Daniel and I worked closely. He was a strategist, confident, pragmatic, sometimes ruthless. I respected that. He respected results. Once StreamCore V1 hits beta, he said during one late-night session, Westbridge won't just lose clients. They'll lose their backbone. They'll adapt, I replied. They always do. Maybe, he said. But not as fast as you move. He was right. Within 3 months, StreamCore was ready for private demo. We invited 5 corporate clients to an exclusive presentation, 3 of whom were currently under contract with Westbridge. When we ran the simulation, our servers processed over 10 million transactions in under 3 seconds, flawless execution, 0 dropouts. The room went silent. That's impossible, one of the observers muttered. No, I said calmly. It's just better design. By the following week, all 5 clients had requested transition quotes. 2 months later, FinEdge reported a critical system-wide failure, transaction loss, data corruption, and a 2-hour downtime that made headlines in the tech press. The issue? A missing authentication token in their process thread, the same one I'd removed on my last day. Internally, Westbridge engineers were scrambling. Publicly, their CEO Ethan Lawson called it a temporary systems disruption. But privately, I knew exactly what it meant. They were tearing through my code, trying to understand something they'd never built to begin with. That night, Daniel walked into my office holding his tablet. They're panicking, he said, grinning. You see the stock drop? I nodded, eyes on the glowing skyline. It's not about the stock, Daniel. Then what is it? It's about credit, I said softly. They erased my name from the story. I'm just writing it back in. He studied me for a moment, then smiled knowingly. And here I thought you weren't interested in revenge. I'm not, I said. I'm interested in accuracy. Westbridge was built on my foundation. Now that the cracks were showing, they'd realized the cost of cutting out the architect. It started with an email. Subject line, request for consultation, urgent. Sender, Ethan Lawson, CEO, Westbridge Technologies. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then leaned back in my chair. It had been nearly 6 months since I'd walked out of that building. 6 months since they'd restructured me out of existence. Now they wanted to talk. I forwarded the message to Daniel with a single note. They finally connected the dots. His reply came instantly. Play it however you want. Just remember, they're desperate. Later that afternoon, I agreed to meet Ethan at a private office lounge overlooking Puget Sound. When I arrived, he was already there, pacing by the window. He looked different, thinner, older, and more cautious than I remembered. Laura, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. Ethan, I said evenly, shaking it once before sitting down. I assume this isn't a social call. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You probably know what's been happening with FinEdge. I read the reports, I said. System outages, lost clients, lawsuits. It's been quite a quarter. He winced. We're in a bind. The team traced the root issue back to the old parallel stream core. Some missing authentication layers, something about a seed key. I stayed silent, watching him carefully. I need to know if there's anything you can do, he continued. We're prepared to offer a consulting contract, full rate, flexible terms. Whatever it takes, there it was in the same corporate diplomacy wrapped in urgency. The same tone he'd once used to take credit for my work. You want me to fix your system, I said quietly. I want your insight, he corrected. You built the foundation. No one understands it better. You're right, I said. No one does. He leaned forward. So you'll help? I looked out the window at the faint reflection of Seattle's skyline on the water, the same city that had once defined my entire career. Then I turned back to him. No, Ethan, I won't. His expression froze. Excuse me? You don't need a consultant, I said. You need ownership. That's something you let go of when you fired the person who built your future. Laura, this isn't personal. It is, I interrupted. You made it personal the day you stood on stage and called my creation our company's collaborative effort. You made it personal when you erased my name from the documentation. He tried to speak, but I kept going. You treated my work as property, not contribution. Now that property has evolved. It belongs to me, and it's outperforming yours by every metric. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rain hitting the glass. Then Ethan exhaled slowly. You're launching StreamCore under Nexora, aren't you? Already have, I said. And judging by your emails, it's working. His jaw tightened. This could get ugly, Laura. Legally, I mean. Then you should have read the fine print in my IP clause, I said. You signed off on it 15 years ago. Ethan fell silent. He knew I was right. He always had. Back when I joined Westbridge, I'd negotiated an independent IP ownership clause for any algorithms developed off-site. Nobody had taken it seriously then. They do now. After a long pause, he said quietly, You're really not coming back, are you? No, Ethan, I said. I'm moving forward. You should try it sometime. I stood, gathered my coat, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, I turned back once more. One more thing, I said. Next time your engineers tear apart the code, tell them to stop looking for the missing key. It was never missing. It was just never theirs. Then I left him there, the man who had built an empire on my work, now watching it collapse line by line. Westbridge had finally reached out, not to apologize, but to survive. They thought the damage was repairable. They hadn't yet seen what was coming next. A week after my meeting with Ethan Lawson, Westbridge Technologies went on the offensive. It started with a press release. Westbridge Technologies reaffirms commitment to innovation, the headline read. Recent system instabilities are being addressed internally. Rumors of intellectual property theft are entirely baseless. I almost laughed. They were still pretending. Within hours, industry blogs picked up the story, twisting it into something more dramatic. Former Westbridge scientists linked to rivals' breakthrough software. Ex-engineers code behind Nexora's meteoric rise. Daniel Price called me that evening, the glow from his office window reflecting on the bay. They're trying to frame it like you stole from them, he said. I expected that, I replied. It's the only move they have left. You want me to issue a counterstatement? I shook my head, not yet. Let them talk. The more noise they make, the easier it'll be to show the truth. Behind the scenes, I had already begun preparing my next step, something I'd avoided for years, a full disclosure of the parallel stream development timeline. Every design log, every version note, every time-stamped build, all digitally signed under my registered IP license, Streamcore Technologies, LLC. I'd backed up everything years ago, anticipating a day like this. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was irrefutable. 3 nights later, I received a message from one of my former engineers at Westbridge, Lydia Chen. She'd been on my original team before the restructuring. Laura, she wrote, they're panicking. Ethan's ordered a full code audit. Legal's looking for proof you violated non-compete terms, but we found internal notes showing they used your prototype without credit. I copied everything. You'll want to see this. Attached were screenshots, emails, and internal memos confirming what I already knew. Westbridge had built their success directly on my architecture while systematically erasing my authorship. It was exactly what I needed. By Friday morning, my PR consultant at Nexora had the documentation compiled into a clean, time-stamped release. Daniel reviewed it once, then looked up at me. This is going to burn bridges, he said. Some bridges deserve to burn, I replied. That afternoon, Nexora's official statement went live. Streamcore Technologies, a Nexora partner, has confirmed independent authorship and registered ownership of all code frameworks associated with the parallel stream architecture. All relevant documentation, patents, and legal filings predate Westbridge's internal usage. Claims of theft are unfounded and will be addressed legally if continued. It hit like a thunderclap. Within an hour, TechWave, Business Insider, and The Verge were running headlines. Nexora's Laura Bennett exposes Westbridge IP cover-up. Insider emails show Westbridge used ex-employees' algorithm without credit. My inbox flooded with messages. Reporters, ex-colleagues, even strangers from the industry thanking me for standing up for the quiet engineers who'd been silenced by executives for years. And then came the moment I hadn't expected. Lydia texted again. They're investigating Ethan. Board's holding an emergency session tomorrow. He's losing control. I stared at the message for a long time. This wasn't just about code anymore. It was about accountability. For every time someone like me had been replaced, silenced, or rewritten out of their own story, Daniel stopped by my office that evening holding 2 cups of coffee. You did it, he said quietly. You turned the narrative. I didn't turn it, I said, taking the cup. I just told the truth. He smiled faintly. Same thing these days. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered across the bay, reflections dancing over the water. For the first time in years, I felt calm. Not triumphant. Not vengeful, just resolved. But as the first wave of public reaction settled, I knew Westbridge wouldn't go down quietly. And I was right. 2 days later, I received a subpoena. Westbridge had been exposed, but not defeated. They wanted a war in court. What they didn't realize was that I'd been documenting everything for 15 years. The first day of the hearing felt oddly familiar. Sterile hallways, polite conversations masking sharp intentions. and a quiet war of words hidden beneath legal etiquette. The U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington was filled with reporters and industry observers. Everyone wanted to see the showdown between Westbridge Technologies and me, Laura Bennett, the woman who built their foundation and then left it crumbling. Across the aisle, I spotted Ethan Lawson and Westbridge's legal team. He avoided my gaze, but I saw the tension in his jaw. It wasn't anger this time, it was fear. My attorney, Sarah Alden, leaned closer. "You ready?" "More than I've ever been," I said quietly. Sarah specialized in intellectual property law, sharp, methodical, and relentless. I'd spent weeks helping her compile evidence, every design log, patent timestamp, internal memo, and chain of emails from my years at Westbridge. Nothing was fabricated, nothing exaggerated, just the truth, in order. The court session began with Westbridge's counsel attempting to control the narrative. "Your Honor," their lead attorney began, "our client asserts that Ms. Bennett used proprietary frameworks developed during her tenure, in direct violation of her employment contract." Sarah stood, calm and composed. "We agree that Ms. Bennett worked for Westbridge. What we dispute is ownership. The framework in question, Parallel Stream Diet, was conceptualized, written, and registered independently under StreamCore Technologies, LLC, with time-stamped documentation preceding Westbridge's internal deployment." She handed a folder to the judge. Inside were certified digital timestamps, third-party repository logs, and my original IP registration certificates, all dated 6 months before Westbridge integrated the framework into FinEdge. Westbridge's lawyer objected, claiming uncertain authorship timelines, but the evidence was airtight. Then came my turn on the stand. Sarah asked only what mattered. "Ms. Bennett, can you describe your work at Westbridge in your final 2 years there?" "I led the research division," I said. "We were tasked with optimizing FinEdge's architecture. When management rejected my proposal to rebuild the core system, I continued refining the design on my own time. The result was Parallel Stream, a faster, cleaner, more secure framework." "And you registered this work under your own LLC?" "Yes, it was done off-site, on personal equipment, and submitted to the U.S. Copyright Office 6 months before Westbridge integrated similar code." Sarah nodded, then projected a side-by-side comparison of the two systems on the courtroom screen. One from FinEdge, one from StreamCore. The patterns were identical up to a certain point. Then, the StreamCore version continued. Smoother, more advanced, undeniably my design. Even from the witness stand, I could see the expressions shifting around the courtroom. The truth wasn't dramatic. It was technical, provable, and painfully clear. When Sarah finished, Westbridge's attorney attempted cross-examination. "Ms. Bennett, isn't it true you removed access credentials from Westbridge servers upon your departure?" "Yes," I replied. "But those credentials were tied to the independent version of the algorithm, not the company's internal systems. I simply reclaimed my property." "And that caused the system outage?" "No," I said evenly. "The outage occurred because Westbridge continued running unlicensed code it didn't own." The courtroom was silent for several seconds after that. Even the judge glanced at the Westbridge table. Expression neutral but telling. After 2 weeks of testimony, the verdict came in. The judge's voice was calm, deliberate. Based on the presented evidence, the court finds that Ms. Laura Bennett is the original author and legal owner of the software known as Parallel Stream and its derivatives. Westbridge Technologies is ordered to cease use of the framework and compensate the plaintiff for damages incurred. My chest tightened, not from relief, but from release. 15 years of work, dismissed in a single meeting, now officially recognized as mine. Ethan didn't look up as the decision was read. When it ended, he quietly stood and walked out, surrounded by silence. Sarah turned to me with a faint smile. "It's over," she said. "No," I said softly. "It's just finally written, right?" Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. I kept my words brief. This was never about revenge, I told them. It was about truth and giving credit where it's due. Then I walked away, the fall air cold but clean. For the first time in years, my work truly belonged to me. Officially, legally, completely. The courtroom battle was done, but Westbridge's downfall was only beginning, and I wasn't the one ending it. Their own people were. A week after the verdict, my inbox was a storm of congratulations, partnership offers, and media requests. The industry had dubbed it the parallel stream case, a modern David and Goliath story about a middle-aged engineer who stood up to corporate greed and won. But behind the headlines, the real story was quieter and more personal. That Monday, I arrived at StreamCore's Seattle headquarters early. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows as I reviewed the week's reports. Our new licensing deals were pouring in. 4 major firms had already signed on, and another 3 were in negotiation. Across the desk sat Gregory Shaw, our CEO and my partner in building StreamCore's next chapter. "You've just changed the industry?" "Laura," he said, scanning the latest analytics. "Westbridge's stock is down 42% since the ruling." "They'll recover eventually," I said, though I didn't believe it. "But not in the same way." He smiled. "The board of directors at Westbridge doesn't seem to think so. Lawson and their head of legal both resigned this morning. Their interim CEO issued a public statement admitting management errors and promising a renewed commitment to innovation ethics." "A little late for ethics," I murmured. Still, there was no satisfaction in it anymore, only a deep, steady calm. I hadn't fought them to destroy them. I fought to free myself from their shadow. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Anita, one of my old engineers who had stayed behind temporarily after I left Westbridge. "It's chaos here. Everyone's jumping ship. Legal just confirmed they have to license Parallel Stream from StreamCore to keep FinEdge running." "Thought you should know," I texted back simply. "Thanks, Anita. You did the right thing staying until now. If you're ready to move on, my door's open." 5 minutes later, she replied, "Already sent my resume." "I'm ready." By the end of the week, 4 more of my former colleagues had followed. Westbridge's once dominant product line was collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. Clients were leaving in droves, migrating to StreamCore's new solution suite, faster, cleaner, more secure, and most importantly, ethical. The recognition a few months later. I found myself standing on stage at the National Technology Innovation Conference in San Francisco. The same conference where, a year ago, Ethan Lawson had taken credit for my work. The moderator's voice echoed through the auditorium. "Please welcome Dr. Laura Bennett, founder and chief technology officer of StreamCore Technologies, and the developer of the revolutionary Parallel Stream framework." The applause was warm and sustained. I smiled. Walking to the podium, "Thank you," I began. "When I started in this field, I believed that if you worked hard enough, the results would speak for themselves. What I've learned is that sometimes you have to speak for your results." A ripple of understanding moved through the room. I spoke not about revenge or rivalry, but about ownership. The quiet kind that comes from knowing your ideas have worth, even when others don't see it. Afterward, a young engineer approached me, maybe late 20s, nervous but bright-eyed. "Dr. Bennett," she said, "I read everything about your case. It made me start documenting my work, even my late-night ideas. I never want to lose what I create." "Good," I told her. "Protect your work. Protect yourself. Innovation matters, but recognition keeps it alive." A year later, exactly 1 year after walking out of Westbridge with a cardboard box and a severance envelope, I stood in my new office, sunlight streaming across the StreamCore logo etched in glass. Greg stepped in, holding 2 champagne glasses. "Happy anniversary, Laura. The board wanted me to tell you, StreamCore just surpassed Westbridge in market valuation." I let out a soft laugh. "That didn't take long." "Not when you build things the right way," he said, raising his glass. We toasted, not to victory, but to integrity. Moments later, my assistant entered with a silver envelope. Inside was an invitation to keynote the upcoming Women in Technology Leadership Summit. The topic, "Owning Your Intellectual Value, How Proper Recognition Shapes Innovation." Greg smiled when he saw it. "You've become something of a legend, you know. They're teaching your case in business schools." "If that helps one engineer get the credit she deserves," I said, "it's worth it." As he left, I turned toward the window. The city skyline shimmered. New buildings, new beginnings. Westbridge had finally licensed Parallel Stream under our terms and publicly acknowledged me as its creator. Their logo still appeared on some of my code documentation, a faint reminder of where it all began. But I no longer felt bitterness. Just balance. At 56, I'd finally found what I'd been chasing my entire career. Not success, not money, not titles, validation. My work had my name on it. My voice was finally heard. And that was worth everything. I didn't just win a lawsuit. I reclaimed my name, my legacy, and my voice. And sometimes that's the most revolutionary thing a woman in tech can do.